de arte es propaganda, absolutamente toda, que una pintura religiosa o que una pintura política. La única diferencia es la tendencia de la propaganda. En realidad, el arte, puesto que es una actividad esencial para la vida humana, no puede ser ni es privilegio de unos cuantos. Que el arte es un lenguaje humano y es propiedad de todo ser que forma parte de la sociedad humana.
It is May 9th, 1933. In New York, one of the most shocking episodes of American art history is unfolding. Diego Rivera, painting a giant mural at Rockefeller Center, has dared to include the head of Lenin. The Rockefellers are outraged. Rivera is fired, and later, the mural will be destroyed. This dramatic clash was the next to the last chapter of a stormy love affair between the great Mexican painter and the country that was then the industrial giant of the world. During the 1930s, Rivera painted monumental murals in San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. He celebrated the riches of the land, the hard work of its people, the marvels of technology that promised so much, and criticized injustice wherever he saw it. In many ways, his art sums up the entire decade. The Depression had thrown millions out of work and pushed farmers off of the land. Hard times created militant workers and a government with a strong social agenda. It may seem strange that Rivera the Marxist was supported by America's greatest capitalists, people like the Rockefellers and the Fords, but he was one of the world's greatest artists and a celebrity. His art was controversial. It forced people to take sides.
I don't believe that any painter can use a mural or an easel painting to give you a precise and sophisticated analysis of the complexities of human politics. But that's not the role of art. But art, on the other hand, can inform, it can inflame, it can propagandize, it can make people think, and it ought to make people think. And that was Diego Rivera's role as an artist and as a human being.
Rivera encouraged an explosion of public art here. He was the inspiration for President Roosevelt's WPA art program, which hired and supported a generation of artists and brought thousands of murals to public buildings around the country. Decades later, another generation of murals would blossom on the walls of America's ethnic communities. Images of pride, of independence, images inspired by Diego Rivera. Rivera was famous long before he arrived in the United States. During the 1920s, Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros rediscovered and revitalized mural painting. Fresco is the ancient technique of painting on fresh plaster used by the Renaissance masters. Rivera would use it to show Mexican history and culture in a way that had never been done before. The man was as imposing as his art, 6 feet tall and weighing over 300 pounds, with a face that he himself compared to a frog, but with a gentle and charming personality.
Rivera tenía en el trato público y en el trato personal una particular
In public and in private, Rivera had a special warmth. And this warmth came from the impression that he gave, that everyone was important. No one was unimportant or worthless.
O seres despreciables.
Diego Rivera was born in Guanajuato, Mexico in 1886. The son of an engineer, he had a lifelong passion for machinery and technology. Rivera began his study of art at the Academy of San Carlos in Mexico City. A scholarship took the talented young artist to Europe, where he would remain for the next 14 years. His Spanish works show the somber influence of El Greco. In Paris, Rivera plunged into the excitement of futurism. He became a friend and colleague of Picasso, mastering the new geometry of Cubism. One of his best Cubist paintings, Zapatista Landscape, hints at an interest in the Mexican Revolution observed from afar. Rivera's first view of a Cézanne canvas had such a strong effect on him that he became violently ill. Now, with the end of the First World War, Rivera returned to Cézanne's Impressionism. Then came a trip to Italy and an encounter with Renaissance frescoes. The monumental walls moved him like nothing he had ever seen. Rivera didn't know how or when, but he would become a mural painter, synthesizing all his European experiences to create a new art. His chance came in 1921, when the Mexican education minister, José Vasconcelos, called him back to Mexico to paint murals for the newly liberated masses. His first wall at the National Preparatory School reflects his recent travels in Italy and Vasconcelos' lofty ideals. His own style began to evolve 2 years later with the start of his immense mural cycle at the Education Ministry. This work, and others he would paint throughout the decade, turned Vasconcelos' experiment into a major artistic movement, the Mexican mural Renaissance. His brush created a never-ending portrait of the ordinary people of Mexico, their culture, their history, and their struggle. Here is the upheaval of the Mexican Revolution, the benefits that came from it. The underdogs who rose against their oppressors, and Rockefeller and Morgan dining on gold in Night of the Rich. The images mirror his own political development. Rivera had joined the Mexican Communist Party, but his friend and future biographer, Bertram Wolfe, felt he was wasting his time.
And then he told Diego that since he was considered a very great artist, and since his art meant so much to the people of Mexico, oughtn't he spend more time on art rather than on politics? And I think he convinced him, because right after that, Diego Rivera resigned from the executive committee of the Communist Party.
When Rivera visited the Soviet Union a few years later, he had rejoined the party. But he clashed with the Soviet art establishment, and his hopes of painting in a worker society vanished.
He wanted a special kind of politics, yes, a special kind of a party, because he was a great dreamer.
In or out of the Communist Party, he remained a dedicated Marxist all of his life. A young schoolgirl had watched Rivera paint his first mural in 1921. By the end of the decade, Frida Kahlo, a major artist in her own right, would become his third wife. Small and intense, she sparkled with wit and life, despite the pain from a childhood streetcar accident that would require dozens of operations throughout her life. Frida and Diego were a legendary couple. The disheveled giant and his exotic wife drew attention wherever they went. Their home became a center for Mexican artists and intellectuals. Theirs was a close and supportive relationship, but like everything else in his life, a stormy one. Rivera painted his new love as a militant in the Education Ministry. This is how she saw herself and her new husband right before they came to the United States. Rivera's epic of Mexican history continued at the National Palace, where 4 decades of people and events are crammed into a series of immense walls. His first step north came when the United States Ambassador to Mexico, Dwight Morrow, commissioned a mural at the Palace of Cortes in Cuernavaca. The mural contained some of his finest work, including his classic portrait of the revolutionary leader Zapata, a saintly figure dressed in white.
A farmer who had come out of a pulqueria very happy and very inebriated, and tried to put his arms around the horse of Zapata. And Diego said he thought that was the greatest compliment he had ever had.
Now Rivera was ready for the United States. His art had captured the essence of Mexico, and he was eager to paint in a modern industrial nation. Finally, San Francisco beckoned. There was a mural commission for the new Stock Exchange building and another at the California School of Fine Arts, both arranged by an old friend from his Paris days, sculptor Ralph Stackpole. Rivera and his wife arrived in San Francisco in November of 1930.
Well, Diego Rivera came as the season of the year comes. It's just inevitable, transformed itself to the United States. And what's more is his friends in the communist world accused him of, he joined hands with the capitalists.
The Riveras moved into Ralph Stackpole's studio in the artist block on Montgomery Street, and Rivera set out to gather his impressions of this new country. Your game of football is splendid, thrilling, beautiful. A great living picture, spontaneous living art. Rivera was like a sponge, absorbing everything, sketching furiously in his little notebook, a whirlwind of non-stop energy. His mural for the Stock Exchange Luncheon Club illustrates California's immense resources, a reminder to its members of where their wealth came from. The main figure of the Earth Mother was modeled after tennis champion Helen Wills, who exemplified the modern, up-to-date American woman. Rivera also included John Marshall, who discovered gold, and agronomist Luther Burbank. In the center, a young man with a model airplane looks to the future.
And I brought this little model with me to show my father, and he liked it, and it was a flying model. And Rivera happened to be up there, so he showed the model airplane and introduced me to Rivera. And right away, Rivera wanted me to pose for him. So I stood still, and it went on and on and on. And I knew a little French. I should have said, Monsieur Rivera, je suis fatigué.
I remember him, he was a very, very nice fellow. When he talked to you or anything, he always laughing. You know, like that. Always good humor. Laughing, talking. What a man, huh?
The mural was a success, finished without the radical images that his sponsors had feared. He had passed his first test in the North.
Well, it was an entrance examination because on the success of this mural depended others in the United States. And Rivera was aiming not at San Francisco, he was aiming at Detroit, at the where all of the heavy industrial things were going on.
First, it was time for a rest. The Riveras accepted an invitation to stay at the country house of Mrs. Sigmund Stern, a local art patron. The days stretched into weeks as Rivera painted a small fresco of the Stern grandchildren. Rhoda Goldman was 7 at the time. She remembers that among the rustic beauty, it was a machine that really caught Rivera's attention.
It was spring, and of course there was the flowering of the trees, and there was a tractor in the field. And he had never seen a tractor before in his life, and he was so taken with that mechanized vehicle that is also now, it was a very important part of the mural. Then the we were posed around a fruit bowl, the result of the blossoming trees in that spring.
Back in San Francisco, there was one more commission waiting at the California School of Fine Arts. An early drawing shows the same female figure from the stock exchange. By the time Rivera started on the wall, the central figure had become something dear to his heart, an industrial worker at the controls of a giant machine. The making of a fresco showing the building of a city shows how the artist works and what he is interested in. The scaffolding forms a triptych composition drawn from medieval religious painting. Instead of a saint, Rivera has honored the working man. While the city is being built, the artist and his assistants are performing their work, mural painting. Below them, in the Renaissance tradition, portraits of architects Timothy Pfluger and Arthur Brown and William Gerstle, who commissioned the work. Architect Michael Goodman, shown with a slide rule, remembers asking Rivera why the worker in the center of the mural seems to be left-handed.
I said, why do you pull that lever with your left hand? He says, that is the left that is going to control everything and direct the attention to it. Now, I said, but why do you have your great posterior turned to the public? When they come in, all they see is your center motif. He said, that's what I think of them when they come in.
Luckily, Rivera's sense of humor didn't offend too many San Franciscans. After a brief trip back to Mexico, he was offered a one-man show at the newly opened Museum of Modern Art in New York. Matisse had had the third show. Rivera would have the fourth. Diego and Frida arrived in New York in November of 1931. A dynamic metropolis, it was the center of an art world in transition. The Armory Show in 1913 had exposed Impressionists and Cubists to the New World, but American art remained firmly realistic. Ashcan artists like George Bellows took a critical look at society. Edward Hopper emphasized the bleakness and despair of modern life. Thomas Hart Benton, who would become one of the United States' best muralists, celebrated American life instead of criticizing it. Would America be receptive to Rivera's heroic images? He plunged into work at a makeshift studio in the Heckscher building where the museum was located. The show's centerpiece would be 7 new fresco panels. 4 were adapted from his Mexican murals, the other 3 were New York subjects. Frozen assets provoked the strongest reaction. Towering skyscrapers and bank vaults framed the homeless. The show broke the museum's attendance records, but the response was mixed.
The comment I would hear would be, oh, but his work in Mexico is so lovely. And this is not like him to paint these gloomy things. They saw it that way. They did not see it at all as a reflection of the times in New York.
From now on, Rivera would record America's faults as well as its strengths. Now he was finally ready for his dream, painting the industrial heart of America. Detroit, city of the automobile, an industry dominated by Henry Ford's revolutionary assembly lines. When Ford built the Rouge plant in the 1920s, it was the biggest industrial complex in the world. His machines were gods, and men, their slaves. Conditions in the plants were very bad, but in 1932, workers were lucky even to have a job. The auto industry in the whole country had hit rock bottom.
Well, Detroit has always been a working man town. We were right at the height of the Depression at that time. And a lot of people were unemployed. And there were people in motion. Groups of people to band together to see what could be done, if anything, to better their condition.
In March of that year, the unemployed consuls marched through Detroit to the Rouge plant, where police and Ford security agents opened fire, killing 4 people. 2 months later, Diego Rivera arrived to begin work at the Detroit Institute of Arts. Dr. William Valentiner, the museum's director, had written Rivera with the Art Commission's offer of 2 walls to paint in the garden court of the museum. They would be pleased if you could possibly find something out of the history of Detroit or some motif suggesting the development of industry in this town, but at the end they decided to leave it entirely up to you. Rivera wanted to paint scenes of Detroit industry on all 4 walls of the court. His $25,000 fee would be paid by the head of the Art Commission, Edsel Ford, seen here in a portrait that Rivera painted.
It was well known through the plant that Edsel disapproved of the harsh regime that prevailed in the plant, of the service department and all of the spying and everything. It was well known that Edsel did not agree with that pole position of his father. So his outlet for opposition went into the field of art. He was active in the Institute, and he brought the Rivera there, and he knew what he was getting.
The radical would paint for the capitalists. Would he paint Henry Ford's side or the workers? Rivera plunged into the smoking factories, stocking the assembly lines and learning the industrial processes. Gradually, hundreds of sketches began to come together. The 2 main walls would show the many operations of the automobile manufacturing process, the interplay between man and machine. Looking down on the world of man would be 4 figures representing the 4 races of mankind: red, yellow, white, and black. Smaller panels would show the medical, pharmaceutical, and chemical industries. Henry Ford had these remarkable images taken so that he could watch the progress of the mural every night at his Dearborn mansion.
I had read that there was a Mexican called Diego Rivera painting a fresco in Detroit, and they usually showed a picture of a guy who was tremendous. That's all I knew about him, nothing else.
Stephen Dimitrov remembers coming to Detroit to ask Rivera for a job on the mural. He talked his way past the guards and found Rivera eating lunch. Rivera didn't speak English, but Steve managed to make himself understood.
Then I stopped, there was a little silence, and there was a conversation between him and Frida, and among the words that I heard was pobrecito, something or other. Then Diego stopped. There was a towel beside him. He wiped his hands, because he was eating chicken with his hands. And by the way, when he was eating it, he wasn't making any noise with his mouth, which is fascinated me. And Frida wasn't eating. She was just watching him with a curious, enigmatic smile, I may say. And he kept looking at me once in a while. And he said, he wiped his hands, pushed himself away from the table, scraped the chair on the floor, and he says, "Okay, you come watch."
When Stephen returned, he was put to work immediately with the other assistants. His first job was grinding colors.
I had no idea how hard it was. I grounded from about 1 o'clock until 4 o'clock. And around 4 o'clock, 4:30 he came, I says, "Is it done?" And he tested it. And he says, "No, you gotta grind it once more."
Fresco is a long, complicated process. First, the wall is covered with 3 coats of plaster. Then the drawing is transferred to the wall, and any needed changes are made. The section to be painted is traced, and the tracing is perforated with a small roulette wheel. While this is going on, 2 final coats of very fine plaster mixed with marble dust are applied to the wall. Then the tracing is hung back in place, and charcoal powder is dusted through the perforations, leaving the drawing in faint dots on the wall. After the outline is gone over in red paint, the painter's work can finally begin.
Ordinarily speaking, a plastered wall will remain usable for about 8-9 hours, at the most 8 hours. Now, as you keep adding water, you're extending the life of its usage. And Diego painted one time 30 hours.
On the same section?
On one section, and that's devastating.
Sometime later that summer, workers from the Rouge plant started coming down to see what Rivera was doing.
And he became very conscious of them there. And he got so he would come down and talk. And they got over their shyness. The workers are very shy about this stuff, you know. But they finally began to talk to him. Well, this thing is, you should have a little over this other way, now, over there, you know. And they would give them all kinds of, and he was listening. And so the next time they would come back, he would say, well, did I do it right?
Although Rivera worked himself and his crew to exhaustion, he still found time to socialize. There were dinners at Henry Ford's house, and an evening of entertainment by the local Mexican community. The finale, a Mexican hat dance by unemployed Ford worker Jose Alfaro.
We went down stage and went to say hello to Mr. Rivera. He congratulated me. He said, very good. He said, keep on going. Show the art of our country to these people.
Alfaro remembers that as winter approached, more and more Mexicans joined the ranks of the unemployed. When families decided to return to Mexico, Rivera was there every week at the train station with money for the trip.
He paid for everything, for all the expenses for the people. And according to this figures, November 1st, 1932. See, here he is, and Frida, talking to a lady with a child. He cared for the children. He goes to each car over there, you know, he look around. He look at somebody that look honest, I believe. And he said, you want in this car? Yeah, well, here. He give him some money, some bills, I don't know how much. He said, here, I want you to take care of this car, the children. Buy them milk, buy them whatever they want until they get to Mexico.
Although no records of the departures were kept, it's likely that Rivera helped several thousand of his countrymen to return home. As usual, Rivera was the focus of attention. Frida remained in the background.
Diego wanted her to paint. He said, she paints better than I do. And he tried to encourage her. But she was restless, and she was also pregnant. And one night, I was staying over at their house, and I heard this crying, and I thought that Rivera and Frida were having a fight. I had never heard anything so harsh as I heard then. And I didn't know what to do, and all of a sudden, Diego came in with his hair all disheveled, and he said, call a doctor quickly, Frida is having a miscarriage. And when I saw her, it was like her paintings. There was blood all over her body, and she was just crying, and her tresses were wet with tears.
This experience proved to be the catalyst that would finally transform Frida Kahlo into a serious artist. While she recovered, Diego continued his work at the Institute. It would take 11 months for him to complete the mural cycle that is known today as Detroit Industry. Rivera's brush condensed the miles of factory into a dense puzzle of activity, swooping and gliding in interlocking rhythms that are echoed in the rippling strata of rocks and fossils. The waves of growing plants and the growth of human life itself. It is a complete view, from the riches of the earth to the wonders that man has created from them. This art is about process, not results. In the two giant walls devoted to the manufacture of the 1932 Ford, the finished car is almost invisible in the distance, incidental to the concentration of labor and technology that produced it. Rivera's tribute to the workers of Detroit came as a shock to the city's cultural establishment.
And they found every possible excuse to find that what he was doing was nasty. And when they said they don't show the workers smiling, while they're working. Like in the ads of cigarettes, they should be smiling. Everything should be lovely. Art is a lovely thing.
Although the critics disliked the entire work, their venom was focused on a small panel that shows a doctor and a nurse vaccinating a baby. The painting recalls a nativity scene with the doctor modeled after the museum's director, Dr. Valentiner, the nurse after Jean Harlow, and a baby that resembles the Lindbergh baby.
He might have said, no, it wasn't. It was pure science. But I know because I was there when he was designing it, and he was having the greatest joy in being able to combine the beauty of the Holy Family with the understanding of the medicine where the animals were the ones from which the vaccine was taken.
Coming from anyone else, the religious reference might not have drawn criticism. But Rivera was a Marxist who didn't believe in religion. Sacrilege was the charge leveled by conservative priests who admitted that they had never even seen the picture. The controversy grew. And finally, there was a petition to destroy the murals. Whether or not Rivera intended to create controversy, he was pleased with the result.
He smiled, He says, muchacho, éxito. It means, when éxito in español means we won, we won. I said, what do you mean? They're going to erase them. He said, they don't do it. He said, they won't do it. He said, any kind of work, big or small, if you have no critics, it's worth nothing.
They paraded around, and when Edsel Ford told them that I paid $25,000 for these murals, they're going to stay, there was nobody running around the museum the next day. Everybody went home.
And Rivera even got his own song.
About the meaning of his work, there grew an awful schism. Some people called the frescoes art, some called them communism. They said if you had shown our soul, we wouldn't so much mind it. Rivera said I looked for it, but gosh, I couldn't find it.
Halfway through his work in Detroit, Rivera had been invited to paint a mural in an immense group of buildings rising in Midtown Manhattan. Rockefeller Center, the creation of John D. Rockefeller Jr., would be the largest office complex in the world. It would make extensive use of works of art. Picasso and Matisse had turned down invitations to submit mural designs, and Rivera only accepted at the urging of Nelson Rockefeller. He was given an ambitious theme, man at the crossroads, looking with hope and high vision to the choosing of a new and better future. Rivera's first sketches seemed vague and allegorical, but the lack of inspiration didn't bother architect Raymond Hood when Rivera gave him the drawing to approve.
And Raymond Hood looked at it kind of fast and then signed his name at the bottom, lower right-hand side. And then he rolled the sketch and gave it back to Diego. And then Raymond Hood had a little briefcase. He opened it up and took out a contract, pretty fat contract, and handed it over to Diego. And Diego took it, looked at the front of it, and then turned to the last page and signed his name. And Raymond Hood said to him, "This I heard. Mr. Rivera, you better have your lawyer look over this contract because it's pretty binding." And Diego says, "You trust me? You don't look at sketch. You trust me, I trust you."
Later, the trust would disappear. Rivera sent assistants on to New York to prepare the walls at Rockefeller Center. He arrived a little later with a new design that features two huge ellipses containing celestial bodies and microscopic cells. At their intersection is modern man. For Rivera, man's choice is a political one, capitalism or socialism. One side of the mural shows war, with the hungry demonstrating while the rich drink and play cards. On the other side, triumphant workers march in Red Square in images drawn from Rivera's Russian sketches. The New York World Telegram was the first to sound the alarm, suggesting that the radical painter had put one over on the Rockefellers. The next day came criticism from the other side, communists who felt that Rivera hadn't gone far enough.
This article made him angry because he felt he was a better communist than they all were. And so he was going to prove to them that he wasn't afraid of any capitalist and that he was absolutely not a renegade to communism. And he moved what he had sketched that was on the side of the wall, he moved it towards the center. And it was Lenin.
Lenin had been hidden in the middle of a group of figures, wearing a cap. Rivera took the cap off and showed him surrounded by workers, soldiers, and the young lovers that the mural had brought together. The story continues from Lucien Bloch's diary.
May 6th. Diego has finished most of the north panel. There are rumors now, something quite expected, that Nelson Rockefeller saw Lenin and didn't like the idea.
According to Clifford White, one of Rivera's assistants, the idea of including Lenin had actually come from Nelson's own mother, Abby Rockefeller. Mrs. J.D. Jr. said he didn't give communism enough importance and asked him to include a portrait of Lenin. As the tension increased, Lucien Bloch smuggled in her small Leica and took the only pictures that would survive of the mural. Then came the ultimatum in a letter from Nelson to Diego. As much as I dislike to do so, I'm afraid we must ask you to substitute the face of some unknown man where Lenin's face now appears. Rivera refused to remove Lenin, but offered to add Lincoln instead of the nightclub scene. On May 9th, agents for the building, accompanied by an army of security guards, paid Rivera off and ordered work stopped on the mural.
Then Diego comes around and walks up to where Lucien and I were mixing the stuff.
And he said, "Stop work," he said in French.
How did he say?
Maintenant la bataille commence. Now the battle begins.
The Battle of Rockefeller Center provoked a furious public debate. Artists throughout the country rallied to support Rivera, and the Rockefellers were bombarded with protests. Critic Louis Mumford wired them. Rivera murals are most vital art in Rockefeller Center. To hide Rivera work would exhibit weakness. To destroy it would be an act of unforgivable barbarism. The other side attacked the politics of the mural and its creator. Rockefeller ordered a plain ham sandwich, but the cook put some onions on it. Rockefeller says I will pay you for it, but I won't eat the onions. At the height of the controversy, E.B. White, writing in the New Yorker, summed up the vast gulf that separated Diego Nelson in his poem, I Paint What I See, a ballad of artistic integrity, which concludes, I paint what I paint what I see. I paint what I think, said Rivera. And the thing that is dearest in life to me in a bourgeois hall is integrity. However, I'll take out a couple of people drinking and put in a picture of Abraham Lincoln. I could even give you McCormick's Reaper and still not make my art much cheaper. But the head of Lenin has got to stay, or my friends will give me the bird today. The bird forever. It's no good taste in a man like me, said John Dee's grandson Nelson, to question an artist's integrity or mention a practical thing like a fee. But I know what I like to a large degree, though art I hate to hamper. For 21,000 conservative bucks, you painted a radical. I say, shucks, I never could rent the offices, the capitalistic offices, for this, as you know, is a public hall, and people want doves or a tree in fall. And though your art I dislike to hamper, I owe a little to God and Grandpa, and after all, it's my wall. We'll see if it is, said Rivera. The damage spread, and General Motors canceled a pending mural commission. Rivera had to fight back before he left New York. He decided to use the rest of his Rockefeller money to paint a comic book-style portrait of America at the New Worker School, a small communist group led by his old friend, Bertram Wolfe. Its central panel was Rivera's chance to paint Lenin without apology. Here are the saints of communism, leaders whose political differences could only have been resolved in Rivera's imagination. Instead of his usual optimism, there's a bitter mood, mirroring his own frustrations in New York. Later, when the school was disbanded, most of the panels were given to a labor union and destroyed in a fire. Rivera had run out of walls in the United States. He and Frida returned to Mexico at the end of 1933, leaving behind the unfinished Man at the Crossroads. The Rockefellers had promised that the mural would be preserved, but 2 months later came the news that it had been blasted from the wall. Man at the Crossroads wouldn't die. Rivera would bring it back to life at the Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico City, working from photographs of the destroyed New York wall. The recreation is remarkably similar to the destroyed work, glowing with bright colors, packed with energy and ideas. Lenin remains as the symbol of unity, but there is a slight change on the other side of the mural. While the flappers continue their card game in the nightclub, who do we find in the background but John D. Rockefeller Jr. himself? Rivera completes his revenge by painting syphilis germs right over his tormentor's head. Rivera's mural at Rockefeller Center was replaced with an inoffensive composition by José Serra. And though Man at the Crossroads lives on in Mexico, here is what might have been in New York. Although Rivera was gone, he had made an incredible impact on American artists. One of them, George Biddle, wrote to President Roosevelt citing Rivera's role in expressing the ideals of the Mexican Revolution. He suggested that the New Deal could be promoted in the same way. Out of this came federal programs to put artists to work and create public art throughout the country.
What the WPA did was to make it respectable to be an artist and made it socially legitimate for artists to be on the public payroll. And again, the example of the Mexican muralist was there.
And practically every artist I knew was on the project, painting like mad and getting paid by the week. It was a tremendous thing. Everyone that I know of became very aware of the working class as an art form, as a subject matter.
American artists were eager to rediscover their country. One of the best examples of the WPA's Art for the Millions can be found at San Francisco's Coit Tower. Walls devoted to ordinary people and everyday life. Walls inspired by Rivera. Some artists remained faithful to Rivera's example. Ben Shahn had been an assistant at Rockefeller Center, selected on the basis of his powerful paintings of Sacco and Vanzetti. Shahn continued as the most important painter in the tradition of social realism. Other artists known today for their abstract work were nurtured by the WPA. Arshio Gorky went on to create mystic, biomorphic works. Jackson Pollock's WPA walls gave no hint of the dynamic, dripped abstractions that would become his hallmark. The rise of American abstract art in the 1940s was itself a response to the narrative tradition of the 1930s. Rivera's stay in the United States had also affected him. Back in Mexico, his new work at the National Palace echoed the increasingly radical themes of Rockefeller Center and the New Workers' School. This was his last major wall of the decade, although he continued to turn out smaller commercial works. These were times of personal crises and political conflict. His weakness for beautiful women strained his relationship with Frida, and an affair with her sister proved to be the final straw. Frida wrote, "In the end, I love you more than my own skin. And though you may not love me the same way, still, you love me somewhat." Separated and divorced in 1935, they remained on friendly terms. On the political front, Rivera had become a supporter of Leon Trotsky, the exiled Russian revolutionary leader.
Expelled from Norway, Leon Trotsky arrives in Mexico accompanied by his wife. Trotsky is a guest of Diego Rivera, the famous Mexican artist who has put a house at the disposal of his guest. Mrs. Rivera accompanies the Trotskys as they go to take a train for Mexico City, and fears of demonstrations against Trotsky come to nothing.
Eventually, the relationship turned sour, and the Trotskys moved into their own house a few blocks away. Trotsky lived in constant fear of assassination. When an attempt was made, Rivera was questioned by the police. It was time for a change, and his old friend Timothy Pfluger provided it, an invitation to paint at the World's Fair on Treasure Island in San Francisco. The fair featured a show of European masters when it opened in 1939, but the paintings were sent home when the war broke out. The exposition offered non-stop entertainment of all sorts, so Pfluger came up with a show where the public could watch artists at work. The star would be Rivera. He arrived with actress Paulette Goddard in June 1940 and plunged into one of his most ambitious works. Pan-American unity shows the coming together of North and South to form a common American identity. Working in public was a strain. Once a group of visitors stayed until the plaster had started to dry.
And Rivera knew he'd lost his whole day's work, and he was furious. He had what Frida called a coraje, and in other words, he simply completely lost his temper and began to scream and and destroy the fresco with the end of the brush, and the assistants all disappeared as if they'd evaporated, except me. And he said, "You're behaving like a 5-year-old child." And I said, "Stop that." And Rivera was so surprised that anyone talked back to him that he did. He stopped it.
The art of the South and the technology of the North meet in an immense figure that dominates the center of the mural. This brooding icon combines the spirit of Detroit, the stamping press, with Coatlicue, the Aztec goddess of earth and death. With this image, Rivera has finally captured the essence of these two contrasting worlds. And then there was good news from Mexico. Diego and Frida were about to be reunited.
He said, Frida is going to come up again. She's going to come up to the fair and meet me here, and we're going to be remarried.
Frida takes her place in the mural in front of Diego and Paulette Goddard, a remote and troubled figure. In real life, the reconciliation was a joyous one. A note from Frida to Diego sums up her feelings.
Diego, my love, don't forget that when the fresco is done, when you finish the fresco, we will be together forever. That's underlined, without quarrels or anything, only to love each other very much.
Pan-American unity was meant for the library at San Francisco City College, and Rivera was supposed to return to paint new sections for the work. But the war and then Pfluger's death kept the plans from being carried out. The mural was stored for 22 years and finally installed in a theater at San Francisco City College. When Rivera left in 1941, he would never return to the United States. And so we leave him where we met him, back in Mexico, at peace again and reunited with Frida. He continued painting there until his death in 1957. We now understand how much Diego Rivera influenced the artistic life of the United States, how his clear vision captured America with all its strengths and faults. The images of struggle, power, and hope that his great walls offer are as relevant today as when they were first painted. Here and in Mexico, he leaves a powerful record of what art can be when it is dedicated to humanity.
El artista no lo es si no es ante todo un ser humano profundamente humano, hasta el final. Si el artista no es capaz de sentir todo aquello que siente la humanidad, si el artista no es capaz de amar hasta el olvido de sí mismo, si es necesario hasta el sacrificio de sí mismo y de su propio genio, si no sabe abandonar el pincel mágico para empuñar el bastón de mando y derrotar al opresor de su pueblo, en ese caso no es un gran artista. El gran artista es el que es un grande amador de sus semejantes, el que vive y trabaja exclusivamente para contribuir tanto como pueda, lo más que pueda, si no puede mucho, que puede hacer, a la armonía de los hombres con la tierra y de los hombres entre sí.